So let's move on now to Mercedes, John. They've got Antonelli and George Russell. We know Russell's out of contract, so that's a potentially interesting one.
Yeah, I think this is perhaps the most open of the grid. I think in terms of we can't predict how it's going to play out and which one of them or both of them are going to come on. There is endless options that you can slot in here. So if Russell is out of contract, and I think he could become the kind of centre point of the driver market because he's a race winner, very quick. He's available, and if someone wants somebody, commits early and goes for him, they could probably get him. So he could be in quite a good situation in terms of bigging up his own money if Toto gets around to doing a new deal, seeing what else is around, and potentially being used. Does Christian Horner, for example, if Liam Lawson isn't performing early on, they think that maybe they need someone definitely stronger in that second car, knowing Russell's available. Do you just commit and go for Russell? Because that would annoy Toto massively and leave him with a potential hole to fill. And I think Christian would like nothing more than that. You get a confirmed race winner in the car. And it'd be quite fun having George and Max in the same team after what happened in Abu Dhabi last year. So that's potential movement there. And then Antonelli's obviously the big uncertainty because the scale of his season coming up, I think, goes from being superstar, brilliant driver, winning races, and being the best thing F1's seen for years, to potentially someone who's come in a bit inexperienced, a lot of crashes, needs building, needs a bit of support, and could even be parked somewhere else if Mercedes don't see the progress. So I think his potential is two extremes, and he'll probably end up somewhere in the middle. And Toto's decision on what he does with Russell, for example, and if Max does become available and starts banging on other people's doors, does he then think, actually, Antonelli is the long-term future, so we'll kind of keep him and build him up and get him, and George is one that makes way? Or is it a situation that Antonelli is struggling and they need to do something different, and then Max slots in there? So I see it. The potential's there for everything to change, but I'm going to be really boring again and say both are going to stay into 26.
I actually back that. I would say Mercedes doesn't change because I don't think that, despite the door that was left open last year by Wolff, I just don't think Mercedes would be foolish enough to oust either Russell or Antonelli, one of their own, for the potential problems and expense that would be involved with getting Verstappen, and with the potential ceiling that you have with the drivers that you're going into 2025 with. One of the things that was so confusing last year with the open courting of Verstappen was that Wolff was basically setting Mercedes up to have to dump one of its own prospects. In an ideal world, especially if you also take at face value the faith that Mercedes says it has in Russell and Antonelli, that means willingly dropping a world champion caliber driver. Now, when you've got an actual proven world champion on the market who might be interested in joining your team, look, I understand why that makes sense, but it's more than just the path of least resistance. In Antonelli, you have, according to Mercedes, a future superstar who'll win many titles if he has the car in the future. And in Russell, you've got a driver who really rose to the occasion in 2024. I think it's a different... I do think it is a different equation if you're judging Russell in the end of 2023, when he looked a little bit more wobbly against Hamilton. He hadn't quite smoothed out some of the rough edges that I think we were waiting for him to do. But he really stepped up more through 2024. And the way that he commanded that Las Vegas weekend towards the end of the year, I don't think a Russell of 22 or 23 would have done that. So I would just be surprised if Mercedes is willing to toss either of those drivers away, because it will have to. I'd also imagine I would love to be in the situation when, because obviously Russell is effectively a Mercedes-managed driver, that if Red Bull and Christian Horner wanted to make an early move, as John was suggesting, I would absolutely love it if the Toto had to handle those negotiations himself. That would be absolutely brilliant.
I would be very, very surprised with Mercedes if Antonelli gets abandoned, because I think they're going to back him to the hilt. They've done that up to now, and I think it would have to be a catastrophe for them to shove him onto another team or anything. I think they really would. they really would only do that in extreme set of circumstances. I suppose the Russell one, as we talked about, if Red Bull sense they're going to lose Verstappen, let's say Verstappen early in the season says, oh, this is the fourth best car in the first few races, I'm not interested in next year, I'm going to make my way out of it, then it makes sense for Red Bull to try and get Russell, doesn't it? And I always remember you were in China last year, weren't you, John, when after the race we had the Toto Wolff session where he was talking about Max Verstappen, and then Christian Horner talked to us after, and there were questions about, oh, Toto's courting Max again publicly, and Horner just threw in that, well, Russell's out of contract, so that's clearly just there in the back of his mind as an option as well. I'm not sure.
He said at the end of last year that he did it again at the end of last year, saying that, you know, Russell's a free agent and he'd be someone of interest. I mean, the indication I got when I spoke to Horner is that he's happy to use the fact that Russell's a free agent in as part of the sort of driver market warfare, but I didn't get the impression he was kind of super serious about exploring it properly. I feel like there might be a little bit of bad blood between Red Bull and Russell. I think Russell's pushed on a nerve a few times now with his conduct on track and off it around Verstappen, that maybe there's a little bit of needle between driver and organisation there.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised to see them trying to put Russell alongside Verstappen, because we know how cautious they've been about who they pair Verstappen with by eschewing Sainz. But if Verstappen goes, then Russell is the obvious one. I'd probably rather have Russell over Alonso. Alonso, ultimately, he's still performing at a high level, but age is ultimately somewhat against him. So, yeah, I would have thought if you're Mercedes, you're quite keen to get Russell tied up. And actually, if Antonelli starts the season pretty strongly, that probably helps Russell, because they'll think, yeah, this is the lineup we want. We'll get Russell in. We don't need. He's an insurance policy. At worst and at best, he's the lead driver with Antonelli coming up. So I think Antonelli and Russell as Mercedes, both in our prime and our alternative timeline for 2026, stay in place.